Good evening. I'm an alcoholic named Bill. Thank you, Karen, and congratulations to the celebrants. That's wonderful. I will start a little bit. I noticed, and I gave Karen a little bit of a grief. I grew up going to a Presbyterian church in the Midwest, and when the new pastor came in, about the time I was getting ready for confirmation, I shared the same sense of humor as my father. The new pastor changed the program so that they didn't take the collection until after he preached to the congregation. So my father said to him, he said, "Are you sure you're confident enough in yourself to take the donations after you speak?" So I want to thank Karen very much for having that basket go around before I say anything, because now you're stuck. There's no refunds. I think she's already got it in the deposit envelope. So that's done and out of the way. A little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I grew up in the Midwest. I really have a wonderful family. I grew up with 3 brothers. We were firmly middle class. Didn't really want for anything. We had what we needed and a little bit more. All of my brothers and I, we had the opportunity to go to college. I went, I think, as the best of my recollection, it was probably a sophomore. I think it was the summer between my sophomore and junior year in high school, so 10th and 11th grade. It was probably the first time that I truly remember having a drink. What I don't remember is when I woke up the next morning, why I had scratches down the side of my face. I do remember my friend whose house I was staying at. This was a little get-together before we started football practice 2 weeks before school started, because we were getting ready to work out and decided that that was what we were going to do. I didn't drink a lot in high school. It just wasn't something. I was involved in a lot of things. One thing that I've heard commonly, and it took me a while to really, and this will tie back, I think, a little bit as I go further along, is I never felt out of place. I never felt like I didn't belong, because I felt like I had the ability to be a chameleon and fit in wherever I wanted and whatever made the most sense. All 3 of my brothers played pretty much every sport they could in high school. All 3 of them went to college on sports scholarships. I joke with them now that I went to college because I could, not because I had to. I was involved in the theater. I was in a couple plays. So if you need a props master or scenery, we can talk about that. I think somewhere in a box is my International Thespian Society registration card. So we'll get back to you on that. And I was involved in the sports. I played a couple sports kind of because I had to. It's a small town. When I went to college, I really dove into studies. I am the son of an elementary school teacher and an insurance salesman. So language has always been very important to me. I couldn't really figure out where I best fit. My mother would always, can I? Sure you can. Would you like to? All of those wonderful things I grew up with. I went to university. When I first went to university, I was a mathematics major. Halfway through my freshman year, my mom says to me, you're going to have 2 options if that's what you graduate with. You can be an actuary for an insurance company, or you can be a teacher. And if you want to be a teacher, you can go back some other time and finish that. So I switched my major to English. Another year later, she said, you do realize what you've done to yourself again. And I then combined what I thought was my love for sports, always having been around it, being fairly knowledgeable, I'd like to believe, with the writing from the English side. And I ended up getting a double major in broadcasting and news writing. With a minor in mathematics, I had enough, because you never know when differential equations are going to come into the mix and you're going to need them. Probably my junior year, I debated transferring between my sophomore and junior year of college. I didn't transfer. At that point when I decided I was going to be in broadcasting, I considered going to a school that had a better broadcasting program, but then I discovered the fraternity life at the very small school that I went to. I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but the school that I went to was a very small school, quite different from many universities in that fully 60% of the student population was involved in the Greek system at that school, which is quite the opposite of what most schools are, because it was a small school. In conjunction with that university life, I didn't discover drinking. I drank now and again, and it wasn't ever anything that I really truly worried about. But I discovered I worked really, really hard my first 2 years in university. I think, as my mom reminds me, she said, what happened to you? After 2 years, you had 1 B on your transcript. And I said, well, I decided to have fun the last 2 years. And I did have a lot of fun, and I graduated on time. And it was around that time that kind of that first harbinger, that first warning that maybe something should come up, was my younger brother's girlfriend at the time for Christmas. gave me a little needlepoint thing that she'd made that is, and it still hangs to this day, although it was in a closet for a long time, the Serenity Prayer. Did she know something about the future I didn't? I'm not sure. When I graduated college, I started working in the town I grew up, I was going to school in. I got a job with Miller Brewing Company. That would be hint number 2, I think, that I declined to pay attention to. I actually quit that job within about a month after I realized when I went to our 6 o'clock sales meeting on Friday mornings, when everyone else in the meeting was having a cup of coffee, I was going to the draft room and pouring myself a draft beer. And I'm not saying that to get into drunkalogs, because I won't, because we wouldn't be here if we didn't know how to drink. But that was a sign that I probably should have noticed. I didn't get involved with this program until truly 18 years later. But during the first 10 of those years, I felt like even though I didn't know what was written in the book, I can look back, hindsight being 20/20, and I can see similarities. From 1991 to 2001, I lived in Phoenix, Houston, Toronto, Calgary, back to Phoenix, Portland, Seattle, and Miami. All job related, and they were all natural progressions within my career at that time. And I look at some of those days. It was when I was in Phoenix, shortly after I left this job with Miller, that it's actually a roommate's girlfriend said, maybe don't you think you're drinking a little bit too much? Probably about 6 months later is when I moved. I don't think I did it because of that, but the things that this book tells us, whether it's a big one over there or the one that I like to carry around when I travel, it tells us the same thing. It really does. I moved to Miami. In Miami, interesting town. I lived there for 12 years before I moved up here, just 6 months ago, as Karen mentioned. It wasn't very long ago. I had a friend, a former boss, very good friend. I was actually the best man at his wedding. He was my first job in my industry 10 years before, hired me to come work for him 10 years later. And I'd worked with him for 4.5, 5 years. And he said to me, you know what? He says, your problem is you don't have an off switch. When you take your first drink, he says, you go months. He says, I see you all the time. I babysat his kids. I hung out and watched his house. He says, when you don't drink, you don't have a problem. But when you do, you can't stop. He said, maybe you should get some help. Well, at that time I thought, wow, this next job opportunity is perfect. I'm just going to move to that job in the same town. Again, I don't know that I did a geographic because that's what I was trying to do, but that's really how it fit together. My first introduction to AA was a little bit over 5 years ago. A very good friend of mine who was actually somebody I'd hired for a while and I actually work with now as a photographer. And I'd hired him to do, I worked in marketing at the time, and still do, but I was working in marketing, and I hired him to do a lot of photo shoots for my company, for promotional, for advertising, internet, that kind of thing. And over the course of the 3 years I knew him, I'd met him to do a shoot, and he said to me, he said, are you sure you're okay? And I said, so well, what do you mean? He said, well, when we first met 3 years ago, we went to dinner after the shoot, long day, and you had a beer. He said, last night, you had 5 beers before they even served the meal. And at that point, he proceeded to tell me he was 27 years in this program. And he said, I want you to do this for me. He says, you can change your mind. He said, I'm not going to push anything on you. I want you to go to a meeting. And this was a Thursday. I was about 45 minutes or an hour away from where I live. And I said, the next day we were doing our shoot. I was going home that night. I said, I promise, I will go to a meeting as soon as I get back. Well, this is, again, my irrational thinking. So I go online, figure I can figure this out. I don't need to call anybody. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. I'm going to go online and look it up. So I'm looking at all the letters next to meetings. And I'm seeing all these C's. I'm seeing all these C's. C's. It's like, closed meeting, closed meeting, closed meeting. I can't go to a closed meeting. I don't know anybody there. So it was 3 days later before I went to the first meeting that I went to. It was an open speaker meeting, a double speaker at that time. And I went to the meeting. And in that meeting, I did raise my hand. They asked if it was anybody's first meeting. I raised my hand and said it was my first meeting and introduced myself and didn't know what else to say. I was like, I'm Bill, it's my first meeting. And at the end of the meeting, they said, anybody who doesn't have a sponsor? And after the meeting, the person who was the speaker seeker for that meeting her husband was in the rooms and was also a member of that group. And he came right up to me and he said, "Do you have a sponsor?" And I said, "I don't." I said, "I don't know anything about it. This is the first meeting." And my friend who suggested I go to a meeting said, "Just go and call me after you've gone." So I didn't know what to expect. He didn't give me any preconceived notions. So Tommy comes up to me and he says, "Okay, this is what I want you to do. Do you have a book?" I got a lot of books. So what are you talking about? I really didn't, and I wasn't being, even though I can be a tad sarcastic sometimes, I was being completely honest. He said, "All right, let's get your book." We go over to the coffee bar in this room. It was a club room, so they had the coffee bar, and it was set up, and it was open 18 hours a day, give or take. He says, "Do you have any money?" I said, "Yeah, I can afford to pay a book. Because if you don't, we can get you one." I said, "Tommy, it's fine. I can pay for it." He said, "All right, I'm going to give you this book. Just take it home." He says, "What are you doing tomorrow?" "I'm going to work." And he says, "All right, here's my phone number. Call me tomorrow. Come to the meeting tomorrow night. This room, same time." "Sure, got it." So I come back the next night. Sure enough, he's there. He says, "All right." He says, "Guess what? We're going to sit down. I'm going to start talking to you about this book." He's like, "So this is what we're going to do. We're going to start." He said, "I want you to read the first 64 pages." He says, "Read the first 64 pages, and I'll see you on Thursday. Between now and Thursday, you can come to a meeting if you want, but Thursday night, the same room, I want to see you back here at 8:30. So I show up that Thursday night. We sit down. We go in the back. There's a small room in the back for sponsor-sponsee meetings or whatever else is going on. We go back and we sit down. He says, "So have you read the first 64? I said, "I not only read the first 64, I read the first 94 because I'm educated. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to do just what he said to do. I'm going to go a step past that. I'm going to show him I'm serious about this." So we sit down. He says, "Well, you went a little bit far, but that's okay. So let's talk about the steps." He says, "Well, you're here. So obviously you're done with the first step. You know that you need to be here." He goes over here. He says, "Do you believe in God? Do you believe that you can't do this yourself?" "I do." He's like, "All right, there's step 2. "Okay." He says, "So step 3. He says, "Now, are you ready to turn everything over?" I said, "Well, I think so." I said, I know that I can't do this by myself." He said, "All right." He says, "I'll give you some time to think about that one." He says, "Come back on Monday night." Come back Monday night. I see him Monday night. He says, "All right." He said, What do you think? Are you ready to move on?" And I said, "Well, I think so. I've read it a little bit more. I think I'm in good shape here." He says, "All right." He stands. There's a little round table that seats 4 people. He stands and he grabs me. He says, "All right, let's pray." Oh, okay. I'm still trying to figure out. So we did the 3rd step prayer. And then guess what he did? Step 4, moral inventory. Well, I stalled that one a long time. Not because I didn't want to do it, because, gosh darn it, I was going to do it better than anybody else before. So first, it was a list. Here's just the list. Here's just every name as it comes out of my head. I start putting them on there. Well, I can't just, they have to be in some kind of order. I'm the son of a teacher. Come on. So first, it was, here's the list. So Tommy asked me how it's going. And I talked to him, and I continued to go to meetings this whole time. And I'm talking to him. I said, "Well, I'm doing this." So first, it was a list. Then it was alphabetical. Well, alphabetical didn't really make a lot of sense. Then it was chronological. But then it was by category. I probably threw that list away 8 times because I wasn't ready to face those fears. I didn't know it then. I went to meetings for about 6 months, very regularly. I learned some of the catchphrases. I learned some of the things you're supposed to say. I learned where the back row of the room was. I learned how to get in just before the meeting started and how to get out the back door right about the time everybody was breaking and saying amen. But what I didn't learn was how to deal with the problems inside me that brought me into that room to begin with. I had no clue. I read this book. I read 164, I don't know how many times, but I read it from an educational standpoint. I read it like I would a textbook. I read it here. I never let it hit here. And so, no surprise, I went out and drank again. I'm a binge drinker. And I say I am, present tense, because that's what I am. And I know if that's what would happen in the future, it's what I'll be. I've never had a problem taking, in that point it was 6 months. Prior to going into that first meeting, I'd gone 6, 8, 9 months because of a health issue that I thought my doctor said had just a blood issue and a thyroid thing. Nothing horrible, but things that I can manage eminently just by diet, proper sleep, all those kind of things. So taking a long period of time, but it never failed that something I didn't know how to handle, something that I didn't know where to go to ask help, because God forbid I ask someone for help. I'm educated, I can figure this out myself. But that's my problem. It's not anybody else's problem. And all of a sudden I found out there's a whole wealth of people out there who are willing to help with those things. I look at the summary of my life to that point, and it was about 18 months from that first meeting. Of that 18 months, I bet if you were counting days, which I know now, I can only count one day, over that 18 months, probably 16 or more of them were alcohol-free, not sober. They were alcohol-free. But does that explain why I would get up in the morning, go to work, come home, not leave my house? Everything I needed to do was on that path between my house and my office and home. We'd get home on Friday night, wouldn't leave the house. Might go out in the yard, do yard work, that kind of stuff. Wouldn't interact socially. Wasn't going, I hadn't even thought about meetings in probably 8 or 9 months at that point. I didn't do anything. I was absolutely miserable. I had a stack of mail. I have all the time in the world because I'm not doing anything. I'm not going anywhere. Stack of mail, probably 4 months worth, sitting on the dining room table. I lived by myself. And it just wasn't working. And I can't say that every time I drank, I got in trouble. Every time I got in trouble, I'd been drinking. I think there's a cause and effect there. Later, October 3rd of 2010, I got back to meetings. I was broken enough. I took 8 weeks or whatever the federal law is for family medical emergency. I took that time off work. I went into a treatment facility. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I had friends around me. Didn't necessarily know the program, but knew that I wasn't going to make it. Friends that I'd gone to college with, friends that probably were right next to me when I was drinking, but they cared enough to call my parents. Say, I don't know if he's drinking or not, but he's not right. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't go out. He doesn't have fun. We don't go to dinner. We used to go to dinner all the time. They called my parents. And my parents, I thought I was hiding it from everyone because I didn't do. Because, as an example, as this wonderful book tells us, I went from drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever, and on infinitum. I tried them all. But it didn't work. I was still miserable. I was fortunate to get into a treatment program that was a dual diagnosis treatment program. That program was intriguing to me because their focus ultimately was, let's figure out what's going on inside you, both places, so that you can have the capability to deal with those things outside. It was absolutely, without question, a 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous focused program for the other things. We went to meetings every day, sometimes twice a day. We had therapy sessions, that type of thing. Those kind of things that I never thought I could come to admit that I needed, which was help from somebody who knew better, help from somebody who'd done before what I tried to do. Because I don't know about any of you, but I can say for myself, the first time I came in the rooms, I'm a hell of a lot smarter than these guys in the 20s and 30s. There's no question about that. Well, I come to realize I wasn't, and I'm not. I never will. No, I never will be. I'm kidding. But one of the things I mentioned is I talked about my mother being an elementary school teacher. Language is very important because I can get sucked in and I can read these words and I can try to figure out the gaps. I can try and figure out where do I have some wiggle room. But you know what? They didn't give you any wiggle room. Pretty straightforward. One of the things that I love about this book is when it talks about we have recovered. It's past tense. But if we go later in the book, we'll never be cured. There's a difference. And it may not mean a lot in the way that helped me tremendously because I could see the difference in those two words. It told me that there is the light at the end of the tunnel. it told me that I could escape from that. And I needed something to hold on to. And that was the great part about it. In some of the stories, not in this section, not in this book, but in the full book, there was a line that really stuck with me, is your bottom is when you stop digging. When you stop digging. It doesn't matter what floor, if you want to use that analogy, it doesn't matter. But when I was ready to give up completely, when I was willing to give this a shot and just wholeheartedly accept the tenets of this program, all of a sudden I have a chance. It wasn't easy. It was absolutely not easy. I stayed in that treatment facility for almost 75 days and then moved out and continued to do things. I have a tendency to go to extremes, one way or the other. And because of that, I pulled, and I know the whole notes, and anyway, I have to prepare a little bit. I'm not going to lie and say I didn't think about this. I got way too much advance notice. But I wrote something down that it's the dictionary, the Webster's Dictionary definition of addiction. The state of being enslaved to a habit or practice, or to something that is psychologically or physically habit-forming to such an extent that its cessation causes severe trauma. It doesn't say what the trauma is. It can be physical, it can be psychological. In the case of this disease, as it affects me, it's both. But that's what addiction is. Alcohol, by definition, is one of those things that falls into that category. And what I find when I look through this section of the book, and there's why these things haven't changed. The black parts in this book are no different than that one or the one that I read in Miami or in DC or in Las Vegas or anywhere else that I've gone to meetings over the past few years. But it doesn't change what we've gone through. I don't know how I missed this the first time. In the doctor's opinion. I mean, it's the foreword, for gosh sake. How do you not read the foreword? I mean, come on. There's a type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There's the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he could take a drink without danger. There's the manic depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. In my experience, a lot of the folks, the majority, however you want to look at it, because all of our experiences are different in meetings, I think that's more the rule rather than the exception. Physically and psychologically, I cannot drink. I know that. That doesn't mean that somewhere in the back, every once in a while, that little head rears up and says, maybe he can. But I know I can't do that. There's another section, and this is one, it's on page 34. It's a simple line, but it's one that I missed, I don't know how many times. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Desires to stop. During that first period, I didn't. I thought I did, but I wasn't doing it for myself. Even when I went into a treatment facility, I wasn't doing it for myself. I was doing it for someone else. And that's only going to get me so far. I looked at the sum total addiction. I looked at the things that I did. I was addicted to food. I probably weighed close to 300 pounds 12 years ago. 298 if we want to be specific, last time I was on scale. I was addicted to my studies, and I referenced my grades. I'm not wicked intelligent, although I like to think I am. I have friends from the Boston area, in case anybody didn't know, wicked intelligent. But I focused on work. Work defined me. I would put in 12 hours, 14 hours if that's what I needed. But I didn't take care of myself. And those are the things that this program has helped me understand. And there's whole sections in this book written. I can go today anywhere I want to go. And I'm not quoting directly, but as long as I have a reason to be there. And that's one of the things that some of my friends who know what I've gone through, they get real nervous. Like, are you sure you can? And I take a step back and I bite my tongue and I take a deep breath, where in the past I would have lashed out against them. Or I would have said, well, what do you, just, yeah, I'm fine. But how many times did they hear, yeah, I'm fine, up until that point? I could probably ask all of you to take off your shoes and I still wouldn't be able to count that high. That's the problem that I have. And so I recognize that, and I realize what they're saying is not a knock on what I'm doing. I believe I've gained the ability to listen to what people are saying to me, to hear what they're saying, and understand that that's what they think. It doesn't have to be who I am. So when I've gone to celebrant meetings in Miami, and one of the things that I came up is and I was talking to a therapist who's also a member of this fellowship, and he said, the thing that you have to remember, because this is how I define myself through all of those things. I was an actor or wannabe actor. I worked in sports, I worked in this, I did that, but that's how I define myself. He said, you are an alcoholic, but that doesn't have to be it's what you are. It doesn't have to be who you are. And it took me a long time to kind of look at those things, because I know that I truly do only have one more day. I moved up here 6 months ago. I would not have been able to, I hid for the first 6 months after I got out of the treatment. I know I'm bouncing back and forth within these last 3 years, but the first 6 months or so after I got out of that treatment facility, I was at least one meeting a day, on average 10 a week. I had the ability, because of the work that I started shortly after I left that treatment facility. The company I was working for let me go. Florida's a work at will state. I missed by 1 day coming back to work within the FEMA guidelines. At first I wanted to be angry about it, but then I realized, you know what, if they don't want me back 1 day late, maybe that's not the kind of place I want to be given 12 hours a day to anyway. I was able to adopt a little bit different approach instead of all of the different ways I could have gone about it. So I was very fortunate, a guy that I volunteered with a nonprofit foundation for the better part of 8 years, who's known me for 15 years, who knew that I was doing what I was doing, knows that I'm an alcoholic. He said, you know what, you've been volunteering with me for 10 years, and I want to pay you for that work you've been doing. He said, you've never been able to 100% complete the projects you worked on with us. So I fell into it. I got pretty darn lucky. Somebody who understood what I'm going through, somebody who understood where I was trying to get, and he offered me a job. And I make a heck of a lot less money than I did in the jobs I had before that, but I have the luxury to do my work as much of it as I need to do, more than I sometimes want to do, but I also have the ability to do the things that I do want to do. I moved up here, like I said, about 6 months ago. For the better part of the last year and a half, I've been dating a wonderful young lady who happens to live here in Southern Pines. She's somebody I knew 18 years ago. I met her when I was in a different job, and she was, between the two of us, I think we've had 4 jobs each since then. And I got in touch with her, and it was through a mutual friend. Said, have you ever talked to so-and-so? And it was the right time. And we've joked about, she knows all of these things that I've spoken here and probably more. And we joked about that we both had to go through those things. We had to stop digging. Ironically enough, her words, never having read this book, she's like, we had to dig ourselves a hole and be ready to get out of it, is actually how she put it, to meet each other again. And after about 8 months of visits from South Florida, from Friday to Sunday, from Friday to Monday, from Thursday to Monday, from Thursday to Tuesday, to the last one, which was an 8-day trip in January, I can do my job from wherever I am if I have an internet connection and cell phone access. My boss jokes with me that I don't need to spend any more time in the money because he's tired of reimbursing me my travel expenses, because even when I am in the office, I'm on the phone and using my computer all day there anyway, so what's the difference? But this book, this fellowship, has given me the freedom to be able to pursue those things, has given me the ability to get up and go. I for the span of 3 years, never called a friend or a family member without having an excuse in my head as to why I had to get off the phone within 2 or 3 minutes, because I knew if I talked too long, they might figure out not everything was okay. I can get on the phone with somebody and spend an hour with them with no problem. 3 times a week, a friend or a family member. I know that I haven't licked this thing, and I never will. But knowing that gives me a leg up. It lets me do some of the things that I never could have done before. Do I do it perfectly? Absolutely not. Not one question in my mind that I do it perfectly. As the book gives a lot of promises. That's one of the neat things about my home group in Miami. And I say my home group because I have been lax. I have no problem admitting that since I moved up here. I took from what I was doing there, when I had my work and I had my stuff I was doing with process, but the program was the primary function. I would very commonly go to a 7:30 meeting in the morning, and then at least 3 days a week, 5 days a week I'd go to 7:30. I had 3 service commitments, and then I would go to an 8:30 meeting a couple times a week because friends of mine were speaking at those meetings. And I went kind of to the opposite extreme. I've been to meetings very infrequently, to be quite honest, since I moved up here. And I've walked away from some of those things that really stick in my mind from my home group, which needs to be replaced, in Miami, which it's a real straightforward, it's a hardcore, it's an old school men's group in Miami. You can only imagine what those meetings can be like. Some of you more than others can imagine, have to imagine, I should say. But it is a simple program, if you'll let it be. If you'll let it be. It's not easy all the time. And I know that's just what it says in the book, but if I stick to what's there and my experiences, I'm in pretty good shape to get through another day. But what those guys tell me is that if I do 4 or 5 things every day, I got a good shot of making it through that day. And they're not difficult things to do. When I get up in the morning, I ask for help. At some point during the day, I talk to another alcoholic. Sometimes it doesn't have to be about what's here. It can just be somebody else who may have had similar experiences than I. It can be me giving grief to a friend of mine who's a hardcore Yankees fan. Ha! Love that. But, because it doesn't happen often. It could, for whatever, it can be any of that. Talk to my sponsor. And at the end of the day, when I'm getting ready for bed, I say a quick thank you. If I can do those things, in addition to not taking a drink, then I've probably got a pretty darn good shot of making it through another day. And I'll go for another day, because I'm happy with that right now. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but I know I'm a heck of a lot happier today than I was 3 years ago, than I was 4 years ago, and ad infinitum, and infinitum, and infinitum. And odds are, if I keep doing this, I might even be a little bit happier tomorrow. I just might be. I thank you very much for your time. I hope I said something that you can relate to. There may not be a lot of things that are there, but one of my biggest issues before was I'm different. And that was the biggest change, I think, going to meetings 1.5 years ago, is I recognized, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's a Miami being a whole different, if it's a Cuban immigrant who's 30 years sober, who has 7 children, and his wife is in prison in Cuba. I got something in common with that person. I can find that something in common. So I hope, if nothing, there's one thing that I talked about today, just one small thing in there somewhere, that maybe rings a bell with you and helps make it easier for you to get through the rest of the day today and look forward to a good day tomorrow. Again, I'm an alcoholic named Bill, and I thank you for your time.